to Career Uprising. I'm your host and professional career coach, Lorraine Rise. Join me as I guide you through an amazing journey of self-discovery and empowerment. If you are looking for work, changing careers, or stuck in a toxic job, then this is the show for you. I offer both practical and spiritual guidance to help you up-level and advance your career. Let's start the uprising. Hey everyone, you are listening to episode 161, The Salary Negotiation Playbook with Bramley. Please take a moment, everyone, as I always ask, and rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. I would appreciate it. It helps the show. It's actually the best way to help the show to be found and to grow. And I read every review and I appreciate it. And you can learn more also about what my team and I do for mid and late career professionals at careeruprising.com. But today is not just about me. We actually have a guest today. And I realized in prepping for this show that I don't think I've actually had a guest in a full year. It's been a while. So this is really, really cool. I'm very excited to introduce to you Brandon Bramley. He is the founder of The Salary Negotiator. He has a wonderful background in strategic negotiations, working with many different global companies, some really recognizable names, Amazon, American Airlines, and more. Brandon has led multi-million-dollar business negotiations and also been involved in the recruiting and the hiring for many, many professionals. And he has over 10 years of experience in negotiating salaries. And he currently runs The Salary Negotiator, which is a perfect complement to our mission here at Career Uprising, because that is a big pain point for a lot of our clients. And I think this is going to be an amazing show. We're going to really reveal a lot of the secrets of how you can negotiate more money. There are certainly, I think, some right and wrong approaches to it. And I think Brandon is the perfect person to guide us through that. So welcome to the show, Brandon. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it and hoping that I can share some tangible advice for everyone to take away from it.
Oh, I think you will. No doubt. Yes, you will. I'm really excited because I have a lot of questions for you. So I think we're going to try to cover a lot here. And I think that you have the perfect background really to guide our clients in this. This is a really tough and uncomfortable subject for a lot of people, so much that a lot of people, I'm sure you know, really just avoid the negotiation altogether. And that's such a missed opportunity. So before we dive into that, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about you? Tell about listeners about your background and just how you got into doing what you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm now kind of the founder and the lead negotiator for The Salary Negotiator. But as you mentioned before, is I have about 11 years experience in not only business-to-business negotiations, but also working with professionals on improving their compensation. But the way I actually got into salary negotiation specifically is I actually about 12 years ago ended up negotiating my offer out of undergrad. And I had no idea that it was going to work. I just decided to give it a go since I was in my negotiations class at the time. And the role I was getting was for a professional negotiations position. So I put a counteroffer together, put it out there, and I was shocked. I got an increase in base salary, a sign-on bonus, and even 60,000 airline miles to do some traveling before I began. So that kind of led me into helping some friends that also got offers until ballooned today to where I've been actually running The Salary Negotiator now for 6 years and helping people with their personal negotiations when it comes to compensation and getting new job offers, as well as rolling out multiple courses to help them learn those skills.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this was kind of born out of you doing your own negotiation and going, wow, there's something to this. This actually can work. Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. Okay. Well, so let's kind of maybe start, I'm thinking, with some of the basics. So maybe what are some of the myths out there about salary negotiation? Because people are afraid to do this, right? So what are they afraid of? Are there any misconceptions or anything like that that people have that kind of keep them from negotiating in the first place?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of fears out there that people have swirling in their head. And it makes sense though, right? If you think about when they're going through the interview process, their goal is to put their best foot forward, right? Show that they're the best one for the job. And the last thing they want to do is jeopardize the risk of losing the job once they get the offer, or spend extra time before they start that company that they want to work with. But some of the misconceptions and the fears that we hear is the main one, I would say, is that the company's going to outright withdraw the offer if they negotiate. But to be honest, I've never actually seen a job offer rescinded through negotiating. I think it's a myth, but I think it can happen, right? If you're being aggressive, if you're treating the negotiation maybe like it's a car salesman negotiation where you're bartering or maybe getting upset at each other, yeah, I mean, they're probably not going to work with you. But as long as you're having like a kind and professional conversation with them and leaning to data to where make sure that you're not asking for a crazy amount or things that might not be reasonable, there should be no risk of losing it. So that's probably the main one, but there's plenty of others as well.
I agree. Yes. So what I'm taking away from what you said is that it's not the fact that they're negotiating, but more, if anything, it's the way that they're doing it. So if they come across as unreasonable, aggressive, and something like that, that's what might put it at risk of being rescinded, not the fact that they negotiated. But even that, I agree with you. Of all the clients I have coached, I have not seen that happen as a result of a negotiation either. Usually it's for other reasons, maybe their budget, something like that. But so I agree. I haven't seen that either. And I'm wondering where that came from, because a lot of people are really afraid of that, or maybe at least starting off on a bad foot, like it's going to rub them the wrong way or something like that if they were to ask for it. That's what I see as well. But I don't think it happens either. I agree with you.
No, not at all. And I'm glad that you kind of confirmed that. Because if anything, right, the salary negotiation process is almost like an extra step in the interview. So if you do negotiate, right, they're trying to see how you actually interact with their team, whether your role is going to be in negotiation for them, but also like just interacting with people on their team, with others, with customers. So there shouldn't be any risk, but it can also be a way to like double down and show your experience on how you have difficult conversations in a professional way to make sure they know they're not only hiring the right person, but that they want to pay them competitively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So are there if we don't want to be too forward or too aggressive about it, what is the right way to do it? Are there any certain phrases or words or strategies that you have to approach this in a way that won't be seen as aggressive or too forward?
Yeah, so we definitely have like a few steps to the negotiation process that we follow. But as for phrases, I mean, the biggest things I can call out is don't mention negotiate or negotiation, right? Usually what that'll do is a lot of people have the connotation for some reason that negotiation's aggressive, or it could lead to them, if they know you're going to negotiate, maybe they'll lowball the offer. So it's an item that I typically, doesn't matter what type of negotiation, I kind of leave that word out of it. But outside of that, rather than just a specific phrase or keyword, is usually the tone, right? As I mentioned before, is these conversations shouldn't be aggressive. I like to tell my clients that the tone should be like you're talking to a friend that's helping you feel comfortable with a move to the new company, and also being appreciative, right? Usually when you're going through the negotiation, you're typically working with the recruiting team, and they're essentially going to have to take your items back to either the hiring manager or the comp team, kind of the decision makers of the discussion, to get your approvals and advocate on your behalf. So phrases like, hey, I greatly appreciate you advocating internally on my behalf, or, hey, I know this isn't easy. It's probably going to have to jump through a lot of hoops for me, but I greatly appreciate you taking this back for me and working with me on this. Phrases like that are showing that you're working with them and being appreciative, since they're usually the ones that have to do the legwork to kind of get you those approvals.
I like that. Okay, so coming at it from a standpoint of gratitude and kind of acknowledging what they have to do and their process. And I think that's good. I like that a lot. So, and that's interesting that you say to not use the word negotiation. I hear what you're saying. I've never heard that strategy before, though, but that is interesting. So if somebody then wants to initiate the conversation, let's say they get an offer, okay, and it's a little bit lower than what they want, and they want to negotiate, how should they start that conversation? Should they not then say, I'd like to negotiate with you. What would be the best way to start that conversation without using that word? What could somebody say?
Yeah. So actually, rather than, because I don't think it's kind of there's a few different ways to do it, but I don't think there's like one phrase, right, that's going to be able to kick off the negotiation or necessarily negotiate an offer. Kind of the way I look at it and the way I build some of our strategies that we found to work is more so treating this like any other big negotiation. So rather than just coming out of the gate right when they give you an offer, have to be ready to throw out a number like, oh, I feel that's too low, is kind of breaking that down into first thanking them for the offer and actually asking them to send over the details, both the benefits package and the offer package. That way you can sit down and review it. And the first step is actually to usually come up with a response, whether you send an email or if you set up another chat to discuss any questions you might have in the offer. Because before you do that, right, you might have questions before you accept the job. You might not understand some compensation, right? Depending on where you're at in your career, if there's variable pay, if there's bonuses, if there's equity, you're going to want to learn how that kind of factors into your total compensation before you put in a counter. And it's also a good time to just ask questions to see what might not be on the table. And doing all this before you even send a counter is actually going to help kick off the negotiation because you're going to start to hopefully learn more about the details and maybe even get some quick wins. Like maybe you ask if they offer a sign-on bonus, if they offer additional vacations since you have more at your current company. Simple questions like that it doesn't sound like you're negotiating, but you're uncovering if those items are on the table. And if they give them to you in that phase, then you can kind of prepare to send over a counteroffer and present that to the team.
Got it. So, you said one thing that kind of triggered another question for me. You talked about maybe setting up a chat. Is this something that should always be done over the phone, or can you negotiate an email? Is there a best practice there? What do you feel about how this should be done?
Great question. I would love to see your feedback on this as well. But my recommendation is actually email, right? Phone is definitely more personable. And all that, you can usually feel everyone's tone. But by doing a counteroffer via email, you're essentially able to, one, control what you put in that, try to control your tone and the exact items that you want to include to kind of present your case. But it also prevents you from getting on the phone call and essentially walking into any tricks or negotiation tactics that the recruiter might have. So depending on the size of the company, a lot of recruiters have been trained to deter negotiations. So what I've found from clients is if they start trying to raise a counter and talk through their points, they'll get interrupted by the recruiter, and that'll throw them off their train of thought and what they're trying to present. Or the recruiter will come in and start throwing different objections and other items there that they're not prepared for. Instead, if they put it in an email, they essentially get the recruiter to have everything they were shooting for. That way, the recruiter has something to make sure that they can share with the decision makers or the comp team, rather than on that call that you're hoping they're taking notes. So that's typically my recommendation.
Okay, because that's interesting. So I would have thought maybe that you might have said the opposite and said phone. I think it can be done both ways. My train of thought is, if you have them on the phone, you can gauge their tone and their strategy a little bit more. You have a lot more feedback from them, right? Because I can kind of assess somebody and if they're shooting me straight or not, on the phone a little bit better sometimes than in email. You get a little bit more from them in that regard. That's what I'm thinking. But you do bring up an interesting point that it's a little bit more of just a one way, one at a time, where you can put out everything that you ask for without being maybe nervous on a call or them, like you said, interrupting. That's interesting. It allows you to just kind of put your cards out there and then let them respond after that. That's interesting. I've always said phone, but you know what? I think you can do it either way. Maybe people need to do it the way that aligns with their confidence as well. Some people are better on the phone. Some people are maybe not, but I don't know. That's interesting. I like your points though.
Yeah, that's a good call. Because honestly, if you're more comfortable and confident on the phone, by all means, you should do it. But usually, what I recommend is kind of having that like email typed out in a talk track. That way, you're kind of presenting all the items, right? But yeah, there's no reason to send an email if you're comfortable having those conversations. But what I've noticed is a lot of people don't typically kind of advocate for themselves very often or negotiate their compensation, maybe once every 3 to 8 years, depending on when they change roles. So it's a conversation that's not they're used to.
Yeah.
So if you're worried about any like tricks or tactics, or if you're nervous, it's a way to kind of get all your concerns out. And then most likely it's probably going to lead to a call anyways. But then you kind of plan for what's going to come up on that call rather than just having to present your counteroffer there.
Got it. Okay. No, I can see a lot of people being a little bit more comfortable with that strategy. I think that is interesting. You present a good argument for why that might work better for some people. So, okay, cool. Well, how about salary history? Okay. So is there ever a time when you feel like a candidate should disclose this? Because a lot of conventional advice tells you do not disclose your salary history, what you've actually made, not just your expectations. But what do you feel? Could that be advantageous? Should that be a part of the strategy, or should you never reveal that?
Yeah, great question. Because there is like both sides of the coin that I've heard it both ways. And then there's also some misconceptions with it, right? Because my recommendation is not disclosing your salary expectations, but that doesn't mean not having a conversation about what the salary is, right? I think people sometimes get caught in, I can't share my salary expectations and I shouldn't talk about money. But at the end of the day, I mean, the company knows what they have budgeted for that role because most companies have like a base salary range and a total compensation range approved for every position. So the recruiting team knows what they should be able to pay. So not necessarily do you need to tell them because you could run the risk of, if you share your salary expectations, of throwing out a number that's too low and maybe getting down leveled or not getting a competitive offer, or throwing out a number too high and like, shoot, we can't afford you. Maybe we should go in a different route. But instead, if you turn that question typically when you get it, because most often or not, you're going to get it these days, on the recruiter and ask them what is the planned base salary range and total compensation range, usually you're able to get them to share that information. It might not necessarily be truthful with the true top end of the range, but at least it's going to give you guidance on where that comp might fall in rather than you throwing out numbers too soon.
Perfect. I'm so glad you said that, because that's a good segue into my next question. I'm just pummeling you with questions today, Brandon. I'm thinking of more and more and more. So, okay. So thinking about asking them for this salary. So it sounds like you are saying, and I think I agree with you, that you do want to find out from them if you can, and it's okay to ask that. What is the range? I usually tell people, try to ask them what the range is first so that you can negotiate within that range and with respect to their budget. And I think it is so funny that in my job searching days, I would try to ask that sometimes and they would go, I'm not really sure. And I'm like, you're lying. Like, no one opens a job rec. You are. Like, I just want to call their bluff. Because I've recruited and I have never had anyone open a job rec without an idea of the budget. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
What do you think about that? Is that a bunch of hooey if they try to dance around and say, well, I don't really know what they have to know. It just stands to reason to me. So I always tell people to try to ask. But what do you think about that? Is that like a strategy that recruiters have sometimes to just play coy, like they don't know what the salary is?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I've recruited for a lot of roles as well, and you always have to get the budget approved. You know what the pay is typically going into it. So usually comments like that are just recruiting tactics or negotiation tactics to get you to withhold or share additional information. So people shouldn't fall into those. So even if they do throw out that, for example, like once, it's okay to say, hey, look, like as I mentioned, I really don't feel comfortable, but I'd like to understand from your team kind of what the pay range is for this, since I would imagine you're going to know a little bit better than I do what value my skill set can bring to your team and what compensation you can offer in that role. But that's a good call out. They should definitely know the budget.
Yeah, no, they do. So I'm kind of the mindset, if they're not going to tell you, then why don't you just politely say, okay, no problem. Why don't we just continue the interview process? And if you deem me a good fit and want to make an offer, I'm confident we can come to an agreement. That's usually what I tell people. If they're not going to tell you, you don't tell them, but just keep it friendly and keep the process moving. But what do you think? Is that the best way to handle that? If they don't want to show their cards, should you go ahead and show yours or not?
Usually I still wouldn't show my cards. I'd probably push it down like, hey, once I learn more about the role, have a chance to interview with the team, and have a chance to review the benefits and the offer package, that we can kind of discuss numbers, but still highlighting that you're interested in the role. But one big example that I heard recently that I think is a great way to explain it is you never would walk into a store and ask a salesperson like, hey, how much is this TV? And they would say, oh, well, how much would you pay? Right? It's the same thing. They're recruiting for the role. It's, hey, how much are you paying for the role? Essentially, they should share that information because they're going to know. And it's not necessarily like an open barter.
We're just busting out all the secrets today. It's just true, but I've recruited enough that I get it. I do. They have to do as they are trained. And I've worked for companies sometimes where they don't want you. They tell the recruiters, do not reveal the salary. They want to keep the upper hand. But I just like to tell job seekers, don't believe that. Don't believe there's a budget. But a lot of them will tell you. And I think that people should ask. I agree with you. So, kind of along the same lines, one trend that is happening a lot out there is pay transparency. Those laws are changing. And I'm really fascinated by this and trying to keep up with them. I think there's about 8 states now that do require the salary to be posted in the job description. So I'm curious what your take is on this in terms of, does this really help the job seeker? Is this a good thing? And how does that affect the negotiation if you do know the salary range? Because some of the salary ranges are ridiculous. Sometimes they're like 40 to 95,000, or more than that, right? So how does that trend play into this negotiation?
Interesting question, because I'll say that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen recently with states starting to roll this out and it becoming the norm. Is it's nice because companies are now starting to show visibility into it. But as you called out, right, there's some wonky ones out there where you might see like $100,000, $100,000 plus gap, or I guess kind of range, right? Which no way are they going to pay one person for the same role at like, say, 50,000 and then that same person at like 150,000. So there are a few tricks that we've seen as companies kind of make a little bit of a mockery of it because they don't want to share that information. So one of the items that we're seeing in job posting is that the role level is not included. So they're essentially putting role postings out that cover multiple level roles, which is why you're seeing a wide band. And then what happens sometimes, especially with some of the larger tech companies, if you share your salary expectations and those expectations fall into a lower role within that job posting, sometimes you'll get down leveled. So it kind of goes back to what we discussed before. But in that, you'll also notice that they're only posting the base salary range, which is one of the items that I've seen from some of my clients that I've coached the most, is that people are stuck in this mindset of, hey, what is the base salary for this role? Because that's what they see on their paycheck every week. But the pay transparency only shows that bit. It doesn't actually show the total compensation. So you're not getting the full picture, right? So people aren't finding out, hey, but what about my bonus? Is there a bonus included? How much does that add on? Is there equity? How much do I get annually on that? Is there a sign-on bonus? So it's helpful to give good insight on where the base salary might sit. But you need to make sure that you're understanding what level role you're being considered for. And then also the other range that's very important is your total compensation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it sounds like, I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm a fan of it. It sounds like that, job seekers should understand that you might see a wide range out there. It's base only. It's a starting point for the negotiation. Doesn't mean you'll be paid the maximum, but I do think it's better than nothing, right? To have that information but they have to kind of understand that they're negotiating within that, and it's only one part of the total compensation. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Right. It's going to save you from having that conversation, hopefully with the recruiter up front, and it's going to give you a better insight. So we think it's a step in the positive direction. It's just make sure to understand that it's not the full picture. Make sure you're keeping a look at total comp.
Got it. I have one last question here, and it's kind of a different scenario because I come across this with clients from time to time. What about when you are intentionally maybe taking a step back and you know you might be earning less money. So this is kind of the reverse negotiation a little bit. And you're worried about looking overqualified or overpriced, but you would take less. Sometimes that's a hard sell, right? To employers as well, as well, you think that you would not be interested or would be overqualified, so you could get passed over for something. What are your thoughts on that type of negotiation when you are okay taking a step back and taking less money than maybe you've made before? Does that factor into this at all?
Yeah, it factors into it quite a bit, but kind of like two different pieces, right? One is going to be selling yourself throughout the interview process, which you probably have some good insights on that, but essentially doubling down to make sure you get into those interviews. Because I would imagine a recruiter is going to ask them like, hey, it looks like you might be a little overqualified. Why are you looking at transitioning into this position, right? But there's a lot of items that are outside of pay that drives people to roles. Maybe it's their dream job, it's a career switch or whatnot. So being able to have kind of that elevator pitch to sell yourself on why you're making that transition to make sure that they know you're okay taking a level change or taking an industry change during that transition. But when you get to the salary negotiation phase, you can't necessarily expect them to pay the same if it's a different industry, role level, or you're switching. So what comes into kind of the picture there is to make sure that you do the compensation research specific to that company and role to make sure you give like a good idea of what is the pay range on a base salary basis and total compensation basis. That way you don't only level set yourself, but you can see where your initial offer sits and where you might be able to push it. And if that's below your current pay, what information you should bring into the conversation to negotiate that up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where can people go? Okay, I lied. I have one more question. Where can people go to find reliable salary information? Is that even available? Of course, there's Glassdoor, places like that. Is that trustworthy? Where can a job seeker go, if anywhere, to get good salary information?
Well, the key call that you just mentioned is reliable data, right? Because when it comes to salary data, most of those sites are going to have data that's uploaded from current employees or past employees. So unfortunately, human error is a thing. So they might be missing some components or make errors when they upload, as well as if it's, say, with a company that has equity in your package, maybe it appreciated and they're reporting higher compensation than they might offer new hires. So my recommendation there is still to use sites like PayScale, Glassdoor, Comparably, Built-in if there's one in your location, and a few other online sites. But make sure that you're actually averaging across multiple sites. You're trying not to use one site as the authoritative source. That way, hopefully you're filtering out some of those errors and you're getting a better picture that you can confidently move on. That's typically what we've seen to work best, and then using different tools like to look at your total compensation, like different calculators and stuff to make sure that you're looking at both base salary and comp as you put that together.
Perfect. I agree. Don't go to one source, look for trends. Look at multiple ones and compare. And if you start to see similar numbers and trends, it's likely something that would be reliable or at least a starting point. Perfect. Well, this has been so helpful, Brandon. Thank you so much. So I want you to now just tell us a little bit more about how people can engage with you, your website or any social. Tell us more about what you do at the Salary Negotiator and how people can connect with you.
Absolutely. So I actually work with professionals to help them negotiate their job offers. So I offer personal salary negotiation coaching if you want help from start to finish, where I essentially act as a silent third party that helps you negotiate competitive pay. So you can reach out to me directly at thesalarynegotiator.com. Or if you want to just use some of our strategies and kind of sharpen your negotiation skills and navigate the offer negotiation process yourself, you can also check out our tools and our courses at thesalarynegotiator.com/courses. But one other site that I'm very active on, especially since we're talking about careers, is LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me there and go ahead and reach out. Always happy to answer your questions and hopefully point you in the right route.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your expertise. I think you've had a lot of great insights, and thank you all to the listeners. You can also find the URL for Brandon's website, thesalarynegotiator.com. It is in the show notes. And of course, I'll be putting it out in my newsletter and LinkedIn and everything, but definitely look at the show notes for a link to his website and reach out to him. And thank you all so much for listening. The easiest way to listen to this show is on my website. Go to careeruprising.com/podcast. That is the archive with all of the episodes. And thank you, Brandon, for being here today. I really appreciate it. Awesome. All right, we'll be back of course. We'll be back with another show in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. That's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard today, please consider giving the show a positive review on iTunes. It would mean a lot to me, and it would help to spread the word so that others can learn about the show. Thanks again for tuning in, and I can't wait to connect with you again next time on Career Uprising.
This show is brought to you by inflowradio.com, the best curated talk radio network for personal development, wellness, spirituality, and conscious business.